July 3rd, 1863, a hot and stormy day. The thunder of bullets, the flash of guns, and the screams of wounded soldiers pierced the air on the battlefield. Did you know that this was the day that changed the course of American history forever? Gettysburg, a small town in Pennsylvania, suddenly became the center of world attention. In just 3 days, the fighting here reborn a nation. But the question is why this war was fought, who won, who lost, and whose was the real victory. This story is not just about cannons and guns, but also about faith, leadership, and unity. Come on, let's turn back the wheel of time and head to the America of 1863, where a nation was fighting for its existence. By the mid-19th century, America was divided into two parts: the North, which favored industrialization, free labor, and modernization, and the South, which was associated with agriculture, slavery, and traditional values. The issue of slavery had become a thorn in the side of every political debate, every law, and every election. Southern states considered slavery essential to their economic system, while Northern states viewed it as a moral constraint. This disagreement gradually turned into enmity. In 1861, the Southern states declared secession and formed a new government called the Confederate States of America. President Abraham Lincoln called it treason. Thus began what we now call the American Civil War, a war that pitted brother against brother. The first 2 years of the war were bloody but indecisive. The North had more resources, factories, and military manpower, while the South had passion, experience, and geographic defensive superiority. General Robert E. Lee, the great commander of the Southern forces, surprised the Northern forces in several battles. His leadership and strategy made him almost invincible. But by mid-1863, war exhaustion, resource shortages, and public pressure were mounting. At that moment, Lee made a bold decision. He would invade the northern lands. Their goal was to increase pressure on Washington, break northern morale, and possibly entice the European powers to intervene. Their next target was Gettysburg. Gettysburg was apparently a small and unimportant town, but its geographical position was unusual. 6 roads converged here, making it an ideal location for military movement. It was for this reason that the two armies almost involuntarily came face to face at the same place. By late June 1863, Lee's army had entered the North, while the Union Army led by General George Meade was in pursuit. Neither side knew that this place would become the bloodiest battlefield of the Civil War in the days to come. The green fields around Gettysburg, which had been farmland until yesterday, were soon to be stained with blood. On the morning of July 1st, 1863, Southern forces suddenly clashed with Northern forces. Initially, Lee's army gained the upper hand. Union soldiers retreated from the town to Cemetery Hill, where they established strong defensive lines. Lee saw the opportunity and decided that the enemy could be completely annihilated, but by evening his army was scattered. At the end of the day, the Northern forces were in a better defensive position. Thousands of soldiers were killed on both sides. The town was now filled with rubble, corpses, and fear, but that was just the beginning. The real storm was yet to come, and the next 2 days were to decide America's fate. On the morning of July 2nd, the sun rose over a field where the wounded had been groaning all night. General Lee ordered his officer, Longstreet, to launch a massive attack on the Union left wing. The fighting culminated at places like Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and Wheatfield. Union soldiers risked their lives to defend their position. In particular, Colonel Joshua Chamberlain and his 20th Maine Regiment mounted a historic defense. When they ran out of bullets, they charged back with swords. The day ended in a sea of blood, smoke, and exhaustion. Neither side prevailed, but thousands of corpses lay on the battlefield, each telling a story. July 3rd, 1863, perhaps the most dramatic day of the Civil War. General Lee took a dangerous gamble. He ordered about 12,000 troops to charge directly into the strong Union defense line. This attack is known in history as Pickett's Charge. At noon, the Confederate soldiers marched across the open field amid the thunder of cannon. Bullets rained down on them. By the time they reached the Union line, their lines had broken. Within minutes, the attack had failed, and thousands had been lost. General Lee told his defeated men, "It was all my fault." It was at this moment that the tide of war swung north. The Battle of Gettysburg lasted only 3 days, but it claimed more than 50,000 lives. Villages, farms, and churches became battlefields. Wounded soldiers lay on the ground for days, as medical care was inadequate. The locals, who had been farmers and artisans until yesterday, now became the gravediggers. The Union victory boosted public morale, but it proved costly. Thousands of families lost their homes. Gettysburg was no longer just a town, but a symbol of sacrifice, pain, and hope. The battle reminded America that the price of freedom is always high. 4 months later, in November 1863, President Abraham Lincoln arrived in Gettysburg to speak at the dedication of the new National Cemetery. His speech was only 2 minutes long, but his words resonated for centuries. He said, "This nation born in freedom is now being tested to see whether such a nation can endure." His words redefined the purpose of the war. This was no longer a mere battle for land or politics, but a battle for the survival of freedom and human equality. The Gettysburg Address is considered one of the most profound and moving speeches in American history. Historians still debate whether Gettysburg was truly the turning point of the Civil War. Some say it was the moment when the South's offensive power was broken forever. Others argue that the bloodshed continued for 2 years after the war, so Gettysburg is of only symbolic symbolic importance. But the fact is that Lee was never able to invade the North again. The North's confidence was restored, and Lincoln's leadership was strengthened. Whether decisive or symbolic, Gettysburg shook the nation's conscience. It was the place where America promised itself that freedom shall be for all. When the cannon stopped, an eerie silence fell over Gettysburg. Bodies on the ground, broken artillery, and burned trees all were bloody signs of war. As it began to rain, the smell of blood wafted from the fields. Women and children who had taken shelter underground were now coming out and trying to recognize their village. Thousands of wounded were still groaning, and the locals were helping them with bandages. Every corner of Gettysburg had become a story of sacrifice, of struggle, and of humanity. But it was also true that the war was not over. Only a chapter had been completed. General Robert E. Lee, once considered invincible, was now marching back to Virginia with a defeated army. There was a look of despair on his face, but there was still dignity in his eyes. His soldiers were tired, wounded, and discouraged. They marched through the rain, leaving the bodies of their comrades behind. Lee admitted in his report that he had been at fault at Gettysburg. This admission was a testament to the truth of a great general, but it also signaled that the fortunes of the Confederacy were now on the decline. The Southern dream was crumbling, and with it the promise of slavery. The Northern forces did not celebrate their victory. They knew that this victory had been written in millions of tears. After Gettysburg, Northern newspapers called the soldiers heroes, but the soldiers themselves knew that the real heroes were not them, but the comrades who never returned. President Lincoln realized that the war was not over yet, but a ray of hope had certainly awakened for the nation. For the first time, people in Washington believed that the Union could be saved. But the scars of war remained on every city, every village, and every heart. Despite the victory, peace was still far away. The victory of Gettysburg also had a powerful impact on the political level. Lincoln's opponents, who had been critical of the continuation of the war, were now silent. Public confidence in his government was restored. Talk of unity began in Congress, and the agenda for the abolition of slavery became stronger. The Northern states increased war production, and public morale rose. Gettysburg proved that the Union was strong not only in military power, but also in ideological faith. It was not just a battlefield victory, but a victory for an idea, freedom and equality. After Gettysburg, Lincoln made the abolition of slavery his mission. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared slaves free. This step was not just a political declaration, but a pledge to restore human dignity. The Southern states challenged it, but the world now stood with Lincoln. Public opinion in Europe turned in favor of the Union, because now the war was being fought on the principle of independence. The blood that flowed on the battlefield of Gettysburg became the basis for this declaration. This was the moment when America promised itself that no man would ever be a slave to another. Post-war America was like a wounded body, destruction, poverty, and hatred everywhere. But Lincoln dreamed of a new beginning. He said, "We are not enemies, we are brothers." The era of Reconstruction began, in which the Southern states were reintegrated into the national mainstream. Black citizens were given the right to vote and to receive an education for the first time. But the journey was not easy. The wounds of hatred were deep, and for decades the country lived in the shadow of its past. The echoes of Gettysburg had not yet died down. They were heard in every heart. Today's historians view Gettysburg from different perspectives. Some call it the turning point of the war, while others see it as a symbolic moment. But all agree that the battle changed the psyche of the American people forever. Modern military scholars consider Gettysburg a prime example of leadership, discipline, and learning from mistakes. Social historians, on the other hand, see it as a symbol of a moral revolution, a struggle that put into practice the principles of equality, freedom, and human dignity. Gettysburg is no longer just history, but a lesson. Gettysburg's consequences were not limited to America. Countries around the world learned from the war that national unity and moral principles can go hand in hand. The global anti-slavery movement gained new energy. Britain, France, and other countries changed their policies on the basis of humanity. Gettysburg shook the global conscience. It showed the world that a nation, if it makes sacrifices for its principles, history never forgets it. The strategy of Gettysburg is still taught in military academies. Today, not only in terms of combat, but also as an example of leadership and courage. A century and a half later, the name Gettysburg still lives in the American consciousness. Thousands of people come to this site every year and bow their heads in silence. The cemetery there, where white and black soldiers are buried together, shows the true face of American unity. Children in schools read the Gettysburg Address and learned that the survival of democracy requires sacrifice. Today, when America goes through political or social divisions, people remember Gettysburg, a reminder that unity is possible despite differences. This battle is not just history, but a mirror in which a nation sees itself. The Battle of Gettysburg was a test of a nation, a test that strengthened America rather than broke it. The blood that flowed on that field watered the tree of freedom. Lincoln's words still resonate today, that this nation, under God, may be born again in freedom. Gettysburg teaches us that leadership is not just about giving orders, but about inspiring hope, that nations can remain united despite their differences, if their principles are true. So viewers, now the question is for you. If you were the American president at the time, would you have continued the war or offered peace? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments, because history History always asks for the testimony of those who dare to think.